Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Marianne Petrie. You can find me, my books, and blogs on dismantlingfamilycourtcorruption.com as well as on Amazon. I am happy to have a return guest on. I have Dr. Bandy Lee on, and she was last on my podcast, season 4, episode 23, where we discussed the similarities of the prison setting to the sociopathic behaviors in family court. And this is no joke. Now, Bandy Lee has filed a lawsuit with Impeachment Initiative to bring transparency to the Star Chamber-like family courts. And this was a press release. Now, these family courts are notoriously secretive, like the Star Chamber in England, which was abolished approximately 4 centuries ago. Transparency is indispensable for deterring family court abuses, including judiciary bias or witness perjury. Dr. Bandy's lawsuit, filed in the United States District Court for the District of New Jersey, challenges the constitutionality of the secrecy cloud that hovers over family courts nationwide. The judge in Dr. Lee's case censored her writing about family court proceedings, ordering it removed from the internet and holding her in contempt under threat of imprisonment if she speaks or writes about the serious abuses she has professionally witnessed, a prior restraint in blatant violation of the First Amendment. And I welcome you, Dr. Bandy Lee. Tell us more. This is just terrible.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for highlighting this important issue. I feel that, and one of the most celebrated constitutional lawyers of the country is now joining me on this. He's the one who helped me file the lawsuit. Bruce Fine
Mhm.
agrees that First Amendment violations and secrecy of the family courts is how they are able to get away with untold human rights abuses.
Mhm. And these are human rights violations, these are civil rights violations. I was just court watching on a case, and Judge Farber in New Jersey, he ruled that the press can be in, and he was not going to remove. He said something to the fact, "This is America. We don't do this here." And I thought that was great to have a fair judge come out and say that.
Yes, I think once we come out of the secretive family courts, we have a fairly just judicial system.
Mhm.
And courts are open for a reason. Our founders determined that courts should be open and held accountable to the publics, just
Mhm.
so that judges who are given inordinate authority would not abuse that authority to their advantage. And well, the big difference between the last time I was on your podcast and now is, apart from my being a little discombobulated back then because I was just assaulted by family court after my sister's children were essentially violently kidnapped from her for
Mhm.
no reason on her legitimately authorized weekend to have them based on false charges and the usual
Mhm.
family protocol. But I've also been involved in more than 50 family court cases as an expert witness
Mhm.
uh, because I was so alarmed by what was happening in family courts, and I had been an expert witness in other courts for over 20 years at that point. I decided to purely take family court cases from then on, and
Mhm.
what I have seen is just shocking.
Mhm.
Every case is worse than the next. I thought my sister's case was unheard of and horrific. Other cases are just even more unbelievable, where judges and guardians ad litem, other court actors, are just wholesale trafficking children to their rape, battery, attempted murder, attempted suicide, pedophilic sex trafficking, and
Mhm.
uh, child pornography production. I believe that family courts are actually the main center for child sex trafficking. It's not often spoken about. it was, especially child pornography production, was mentioned even by the United Nations Special Rapporteur when I spoke with her, but it was not entered into her report. And I'm not sure why people are afraid, but I see it at least in half the cases where the children are transferred to their abuser, and that is 98% of the cases that I've seen. So out of 50 cases, only one was successful after incredible, strenuous fight by multiple experts, including myself,
Mhm.
to get the child back to the safe parent instead of the dangerous parent who would had traffic her to other pedophiles. Um, and no amount of abuse seems to deter the family courts. It's only when they're truly back to a corner that they will finally do the right thing, and that was only 1 in 50 cases. So that just speaks to the degree to which children are being harmed.
Do you find that these judges, they're not looking at evidence, or this evidence is suppressed from the judge?
Yes, the judges are actively suppressing. And as you know, I'm a forensic psychiatrist and an expert on violence who has worked with violent offenders for 25 years. I've treated them. I've designed programs to reduce their violence and work on behaviorally managing them, as well as consult with the courts on how to deal with them.
Mhm.
So, what's surprising to me and what's been very impressive is that walking into a family court is like walking into um, a group of violent offenders,
Mhm.
and including the judge, who doesn't think as a rational person would, but thinks in terms of how can I fix this case in order to effectuate my predetermined goal to switch the custody from the caregiving, loving parent to the abusive parent.
Mhm.
And again, I believe that is because the abusive parent is more likely to traffic the children. And I say so because there are sex trafficking gangs that are waiting around both coasts for family court fodder.
Mhm.
And I believe that my sister's judge, Jane Gallina-Mecca, is connected with a sex trafficking gang called the Barbershops. This has been documented and reported on. Um, so I feel that the judges in the vast majority of cases know what is happening
Mhm.
in terms of who is the abusive parent. They are they almost have an instinctive recognition of who they are because they share a lot of characteristics.
Mhm.
A lot of these violent abusers turn out to be sociopathic, psychopathic. They almost have that radar, that human antennae to be able
Mhm.
to recognize their kind. And so it almost works like a criminal co-conspiracy between the judge and the violent criminal in the case of abuse. And I find that child custody cases are almost all child abuse cases, child
Mhm.
abuse or domestic violence cases. So there is a violent offender in that picture.
Mhm.
And the more violent they are and the more psychopathic they are, the more the judge feels confident, I believe, that they will get the case fixed in the manner that they wish.
I agree. I like that point you brought up is these judges can identify with the sociopath. And also the attorney is also the sociopath. I hate to say it. I mean, not all of them, because there are some good ones. And they can pick up on their behaviors or their clothing, or they're identifying with something with the with that attorney and that abuser. I have found that out as well.
Yes, I recognize them. I've diagnosed many of the perpetrators
Hmm.
of psychopathy, and they share many of the characteristics with the judges and the guardians ad litem and other court actors, and also the level of pornography
Hmm.
and child molestation that come to light in among family court actors. Judges who are later found to be molesting the children they went in camera with to talk to on their own. Um, Attorneys who are found watching pornography, guardians of Litem who are found to be watching child pornography as the litigant is walking into their office, and they do it blatantly and openly. Other attorneys have propositioned to the mothers that if you do as I say, you will get your child back, and
Hmm.
that means sexual favors.
Hmm.
My brother-in-law, Alan G. Chan, in fact, is addicted to pornography. He's also substance abusing. He almost killed both of his children by head injury, was on a restraining order for it. Almost murdered my sister 9 times now with the help of family court. And she's debilitated now. She was in perfect psychological and physical health before family court 5 years ago, raising happy, healthy, thriving prodigy children, was reputed to be the best mom in the neighborhood. And 5 years later, she's not even able to walk. She has to, she gets muscle contractions in ways that she needs to stretch for the entire day to be
Hmm.
able to walk a couple hours. And she was recently in the intensive care unit,
Hmm.
all from post-traumatic court-caused post-traumatic stress disorder induced high blood pressure and muscle tensions. And now she's under 24-hour care. They're
Hmm.
still trying to police raid her for the house. And so this illustrates just how the unheard of medical problems that I, as a medical professional who's been in the medical field for 35 years, including my medical student days, have never seen the kinds of sudden deaths, medical problems among the loving parents
Hmm.
because of the level of heinous human rights violations that occur through family court. I mean, just imagine the worst thing that can happen to a loving parent is to violently take away their child, block all contact as if they were dead,
Hmm.
and prohibit any kind of uh, communication or contact, even with qualified medical professionals, so that you know your child is being raped or
Hmm.
battered or could die. You know, they come back in body bags. We hear all kinds of stories, and over 1,000 children have been documented to have died through family court unnecessarily. And so, and mothers especially, but also loving fathers
Hmm.
are dying at unprecedented rates from heart attacks, stroke, um, cancers, broken heart syndrome,
Hmm.
even young mothers who are the demographic least likely to die of a heart attack just drop dead in family court. And you hear these anecdotes, you can see how it happens. And my sister's example is a case before my eyes where I see someone deteriorate from being the a healthy person with no medical problems to being needing 24-hour round the clock
Hmm.
care.
I'm sorry to hear that. You know, I was also reading about a young mother over in England who dropped dead in family court of a
Yes.
heart attack, and they called a paramedic, but he didn't bring the defibrillator. He thought, "Oh, I'm probably going to resuscitate a criminal." And he walked very slowly into the courthouse, and she was gone. But I mean, I myself have had a major heart attack. So
Oh,
I also have a friend who has had broken heart syndrome. So everything you're saying and everything we're trying to share with everybody is so important to know when you set foot into that horrific star chamber.
yes. And secrecy is how they get away with all of this. And
Hmm.
it used to be, I think about it 10 years back, there was a um, National Institute of Justice sponsored study that showed that more cases were wrong, that if all decisions in family court were overturned, they would be more correct. And
Mhm.
that was because just dozens, hundreds of appeals per judge were being overturned. But now they're not even being overturned because of family court uh, threats and intimidation, I believe, of appellate courts and federal courts even,
Mhm.
where uh, they fix the results through sheer uh, thuggery because
Mhm.
they have so much power. They're so established in their 50 to $175 billion industry
Mhm.
um, through child sex trafficking to their torture, rape, battery, and murder.
Mhm.
It's
Right.
unbelievable, but it's all now documented, despite the fact that family courts have done their best to keep this information from the public, including attacking reporters. And I know of one reporter who died while trying to sue a judge. I know of dozens of reporters who have been threatened. And my own interviews that were published in fact-checked articles by news agencies had my own sister's judge go back to them and order the articles unpublished. Judge Gallina-Mecca, who has a history of this, it's even been reported on by the Washington Post 10 years ago, but she was undeterred. She was rebuked by their legal department, stating that that was a prior restraint and she was violating the US Constitution. She had the audacity to go back and draft her order and attempt again to take down the articles. Since that didn't work,
Mhm.
she ordered one of her underling judges, Michael Antonowitz, who is the judge I sued, for issuing a protective order against me for public articles, public education articles on what's happening
Mhm.
in family court. He did this by the guardian ad litem, the children's guardian ad litem, Evelyn Asirios, who claimed that my public articles were harassment and stalking. How would articles that she had to go to the internet and look up to find out about be harassment or stalking?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
obviously, she was using one of the family court judges to do this, someone she worked with before in the past, because she cannot file a defamation lawsuit. Everything I stated was true.
Mhm. These guardian ad litems, just to throw this in there, they all need to go. They are muddying the waters. And a parent will tell them something, and the parent thinks they're going to say something good about them and the truth, then they don't. When they get into court, it's a different story. And the parent's left wondering, why was I lied to? People don't realize that these guardian ad litems are that d dangerous, for lack of a better word.
Yes, I think they are the most dangerous and
Hmm.
probably among the psychopathic characteristics that I find in family court. In fact, I call it a culture of psychopathy. I think the guardians ad litem are the worst because they see everything firsthand. They don't report the abuse. They immediately adhere themselves to the abusive parent. They're not at all neutral. In my sister's case, uh, Evelyn Nisirios was having daily phone calls with the abusive father, whereas my sister could not get a single phone call with her. No emails would be answered for 4 years of not even seeing her children, not being able to exchange messages or have a phone call, not even being able to deliver Christmas or birthday gifts via another family member or a friend. Nobody would be allowed from the mother's side. And what I find is that they do this especially to mothers who are competent or having been successful. My sister was a high profile executive assistant to the New York State governor. Uh, she was the leading coordinator on Ground Zero after September 11th, the greatest enemy attack on US soil, and she passed all the top security clearance, and she um, did her job so competently. I mean, she was given that assignment in her 20s because of her competence. And yet, in family court, she is considered mentally ill and
Oh,
incompetent, even though 11 psychiatric experts, some of world renown, have unanimously stated she has excellent mental health, exceptional talent in parenting. And they did all the collateral interviews and psychological testing and whatnot. Whereas the guardian ad litem, who didn't do any of that, didn't even interview me, stonewalled my interview from getting in anywhere, not even Child Protective Services. They canceled, the court intervened to cancel my interview with Child Protective Services because I was a firsthand witness who witnessed the abuse on a daily basis for more than a year. And
mhm.
so that's how they fix the evidence, intimidate witnesses, retaliate against whistleblowers, and I was even falsely arrested alongside a world-renowned forensic psychiatrist who's a United Nations expert on torture, who stated that based on his medical record assessment, the children were being tortured. He was also a consultant to the U.S. Supreme Court and the International Criminal Court, but they arrested him too. So
All this retaliation, these guardian ad litems, these third party parasites will help with the retaliation. And this is how I think it works. Correct me if I'm wrong, but these guardian ad litems, along with CPS, will give their, impression of what's happening. And then the judge will just rule on what they say because they don't want to think for themselves.
yes, for the large part, I think judges are appointing these court actors in order to, or even so-called expert witnesses who are the most poorly trained, uh, unheard of experts that I have ever seen in any court,
Hmm.
such as mental health counselors, associate counselors. In my sister's case, it was an unlicensed, unqualified associate counselor whose report was the only report the Guardian ad litem accepted, throwing out this close to dozen
Hmm.
world-renowned experts in their fields who stated that my sister had excellent mental health. And it's just unbelievable what they do. And yet, because none of the true expert reports get into the court record, or my sister presents them and they're not even considered.
Hmm.
Um, they say they're going by expert evidence and going by the guardian ad litem, but in fact, what they're doing is they're picking and choosing, and they have a very set uh, pool of people they go to. They don't appoint any guardian ad litem, and they don't appoint any expert witness. God forbid if they were highly qualified. That's why for the 50 cases that I've been an expert witness, the litigant had to retain me. The court would fight tooth and nail not to admit me. And that's really a first time experience because all my career, I've always been the most welcomed by over 200 courts from
Hmm.
across the country who see me as one of the most highly qualified forensic experts you could have. So,
Hmm.
trained in the best places and have a great track record and experience. And yet in family court, they seem to find some way or another not to qualify me or not to qualify the litigant's proposal. Um, they uh, they pick on technicalities of
Hmm.
their proposal to say that, oh, you missed the deadline to get in an expert witness by 1 day or something like that.
Right. Right. And that's also suppressing the litigant's evidence. The expert, it's just so unfair in there.
I think also litigants enter family court not knowing what they're facing.
Hmm.
I recently received compliments on my public articles on how it helped them prepare, how it helped them face what was coming, because otherwise they would never have known that this is not a court of law that they're entering into. In fact, it is a star chamber where within what is happening is actually a group of gangsters
Mm-hmm.
engaging in organized crime to help the violent criminal and to frame the victim of violence. And the playbook is so uniform across the country. They've been doing this for a long time. And so I've been in court cases across the country. The cases themselves are all unique. Some are urban, some are rural, people from all kinds of backgrounds. But the family court playbook and what they do
Mm-hmm.
within is, and their rulings are almost identical across the board. And that's what litigants who are going in for the first time do not recognize. And they're assaulted so violently, so abruptly, and so quickly that by the time they recuperate and are able to see what is happening, already their rights have been stripped. They've been they've been locked out of all their financial means so that they cannot find legal defense or pursue legal means. They're stripped of their emotional supports because they're placed on gag orders and
Mm-hmm.
draconian seals. And oftentimes now I'm seeing a vast majority being jailed.
Mm-hmm.
That's really alarming.
And these judges think they can get away with that. And I'm hoping that this will come to an end.
I
Uh,
hope it comes to an end because one of the nation's most celebrated constitutional lawyers has actually looked into this and he gets it.
mhm,
And so that's why he agreed to file my lawsuit for me. And he's helping to impeach my sister's judge, Jane
mhm,
Gallina-Mecca, with over 2,000 signatures and over 3 dozen witnesses. There's a great momentum now, and we're in the process of drafting a uniform model for the family courts, and we'll be looking for a jurisdiction that would be willing to adopt it. Because legislatures, I mean, I've testified before over a half dozen legislatures, and they're frankly quite afraid to do anything. Even a very high profile Senate hearing in New York City a couple years ago after the high profile death of Catherine Kasanoff um, led to great awareness and discourse among senators, the state senators, and yet there has been minimal follow-up since.
mhm,
And I suspect that they may have been threatened because legislators across the country are threatened by family court judges if they try to act. And so if we can get at least one started from a grassroots level, then
mhm,
we will be able to begin a kind of model protocol for family courts because currently they're doing vastly more harm than good. It's
mhm.
better for them not to exist. In
Right.
fact, if family courts did not exist, we may save 1 in 5 child murder by parent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so this is crucial. I've been
Right.
calling this the greatest human rights violation on US soil
Mm-hmm.
that needs urgent attention. In fact, if we went in and rounded up all family court judges and family court actors, I wouldn't be surprised if a vast majority are serial felons,
Mm-hmm.
serial kidnappers, and serial murderers. My sister's judge, Jane Gallina-Mecca, has a half dozen murders that she facilitated. In other words, stripped the litigant of their restraining orders or facilitated the conditions where their abusers would be able to murder them.
Mm-hmm.
And these brutal murders have no suspects or no follow-up because she blocks the investigations. And she recently removed criminal charges against three collaborators of hers, including a pediatrician who was one of the first to uh, detect child abuse in my sister's children and stated that they were being abused, put it in the record. She completely changed her medical notes. And when my sister asked for the medical records, she called the police on her for simply asking for the records she has a constitutional right to.
Mhm.
And so she was criminally charged for not reporting child abuse and tampering with evidence. And those charges were mysteriously removed. And it would be the third time this has happened under the same judge.
I don't think that's an isolated case. I think there's more of this going on than the public, the taxpayer realizes, because as you said, and this is a $175 billion industry because of these Title IV B, D, and E incentives. And a
Yes,
lot of oh, go ahead.
no, I don't know very much about the financial end of things. What I see are the medical evidence and how the court actors are behaving in family court in ways that I've never seen in any other court, which is why I call family courts anti-courts. They're
Yeah.
entirely untethered from the law and do the opposite of what an ordinary court would do, all again because we've given family courts the authority to totally seal their records,
Mhm.
supposedly for the protection of children, but in fact carried out for heinous, unspeakable crimes against children.
And I wanted to add to that that I think it just should just be abolished and put everything into civil court, and the parent can have a jury. Now, people have said, well, you can tamper with a jury. Well, that's kind of maybe harder to do as then having a guardian ad litem make up stuff. What do you think?
Simply having, simply having more eyes on the court, the jury itself.
Mhm.
And if family courts were open, this would not be happening. But family courts should not have been created in the first place. Family
Thank you.
issues, if they need special nuance consideration that civil and criminal courts cannot provide, then they should be resolved outside of courts. It is just not a court matter.
Mhm.
And dealing with these, or Jane Spinak wrote. She's a law professor at Columbia University who wrote The End of Family Court, and I was delighted to see it because I always thought family court should be abolished. And here
Mhm.
she wrote a book about it, tracing back 120 years of history of family courts. They were given all this extra authority, extra discretion
Mhm.
um, in order to do good, to do benevolence, but instead they used it for malevolence from the very beginning. So judges are not equipped from the start to deal with the kinds of things that happen in families. This is more the area of social work and the social sciences, and especially given the prevalence of domestic violence and child abuse, which are vastly more common than the public realizes, vastly underreported, and which is what allowed family courts to make money out of creating an abuse industry of themselves. I call it an abuse industry because they play on the public conception that does not realize that child battery to the point of having marks on the body is 1 in 4, and child sexual assault is 1 in 5. And witnessing domestic violence to the point of someone going to the hospital is 1 in 8.
Mhm.
And that's the best available data we have, but we know these incidents are vastly underreported, so the real rate is probably 2 or 3 times as high.
Mhm.
But for the cases that come into family court, you can imagine just they're probably about 95 99% of family court cases are related to some kind of family violence. But the public doesn't wish to think of families that way, so they're exploiting public misconception as well as the misnomer of family court. The name itself is exonerating. It's so euphemistic.
Mm-hmm.
Call them family court, where in fact, if they were truly named for what they did, they would be more like child auction houses,
Uh-huh.
child slavery trades, um, courts that are worse than criminal courts because litigants could be sent to jail without due process, without the opportunity for even a single phone call or bail, and placed in jail for over a year, so much, so often that there had to be a law put in place that they could not be held for over a year without any due process. And these are usually gentle, loving, the most caring, nurturing people are the most likely to be persecuted and to go to jail, which is what psychopaths do. They
Mm-hmm.
target strong parent-child bonds because they are angry about what they did not get in their childhood. And so separating children from nurturing parents is absolutely the first thing they would wish to do. And the guardian ad litem, Evelyn Nesirios, in my sister's case, uh, dozens of her victims have gotten in touch with me, and I figured out her playbook. She calls police raids on all of them. So ripping away crying and clinging children from their loving parent, usually the mother, and prohibiting any contact from there on, and telling the children that their loving parent abandoned them, no longer loves them, wishes to have nothing to do with them. This
Mm-hmm.
is what she tells them. And this is absolutely outside of even the necessity for fixing the case. It speaks volumes of the kinds of psychology that is involved.
Right. And when people walk in there, what they're going to do to you is Darvo, the deny, attack, reverse, victim, offender, and they are re-victimizing the victim, even the
That's right.
kids.
Yes. And they count on the battered woman syndrome, the traumatic bonding that will occur if it hasn't already occurred,
Mhm.
and the kinds of identification with the offender
Mhm.
in total helpless cases to and they fix it in a psychological manner by psychologically abusing the children or creating circumstances that create so much trauma. Because what happens when you separate the child from the loving parent, even when the child is being abused, if the loving parent is around, it's the most mitigating factor. If their primary supports are around, you have a chance of healing from the abuse.
Mhm.
But if you remove the child and isolate them with the abusive parent, and it becomes a life or death situation, then
Mhm.
you traumatically bond with that parent because you have no other choice. It's a survival mechanism.
Mhm.
It's sometimes called the Stockholm syndrome. People may
Right.
have heard of it. So what they're creating are circumstances for the Stockholm syndrome. And if the child is non-compliant, they're sent to torture and brainwashing camps,
Mhm.
which is what reunification camps are really about. They are tortured until they comply. And it's a way of eliminating would-be witnesses in children. And I told you about how adult witnesses are eliminated by decimating their psychological ability, financial ability to fight
Mhm.
back. And they're completely destroyed. I've never seen in my decades of psychiatric practice, people who are as traumatized and incapacitated as those who come out of family court. It's because some of the most powerful individuals in society, namely judges, who have psychopathic intents,
Mhm.
are assaulting the least, the most voiceless and powerless, vulnerable members of society, namely loving parents and their children.
Mhm.
And how can that even be a contest?
Right. And I have said before that these judges need psych evals, I'd say maybe every 16 months or so, as well as random drug testing and lie detector tests to see, which attorneys or even the attorneys should probably have those as well because they contribute to the judges' friends judge campaign because everybody knows everybody. This has got to
Yes.
stop.
I think that's actually an excellent idea. In fact, one of the litigant victims of Evelyn Asirios asked for a psychiatric evaluation. I can't obviously do a diagnostic evaluation from afar, but I can do a dangerousness assessment or a psychopathy checklist, which is the equivalent of assessing dangerousness. And I've
Mhm.
begun one. Already she's exhibiting alarming psychopathic traits. She's a She has the trait of pathological lying. She
Mhm.
lied or perjured over 600 times in my sister's case alone, but in the dozens of cases, she's almost constantly lying. And
Oh,
even her fellow attorneys have remarked on just how beyond the pale her lying is. And judges, what we're seeing in family courts is actually what happens when you give unlimited power to unfit people who
mhm.
are ill-equipped to handle the power. It happens in any setting. It happens within family settings. It happens in corporations, in nations when you have an unfit leader. This is
Mm.
actually what happens. And nations where uh, brutal dictatorships are happening and genocides and all kinds of mass murders and atrocities happen. This is exactly what happens when you have an unfit leader with more power than they can manage. And that's exactly what's happening in family courts. It
Mhm.
is almost nothing other than this, that the judges are unfit, they are given too much power,
Mhm.
and they actually carry out what happens in dictatorships. Uh,
Mhm.
the Soviet style weaponizing of psychiatry is exactly how they weaponize psychiatric evaluations in family courts by
Mhm.
hiring all these unqualified so-called mental health experts who are not even doctorate level psychologists or psychiatrists. Although with with the growth of their industry, I'm finding to my great dismay more and more doctorate level psychologists and psychiatrists signing on. Jessica Byron Caverly is one example in Connecticut, who has done close to 1,000 cases. I've seen about a dozen of her reports, and they're all identical. Identical in that they're extremely lengthy. I don't do 129-page reports. Uh,
Uh-huh.
she charges 10 times the rate I do, and but the reports themselves are actually gibberish in content, nothing
Mhm.
having to do with clinical assessment. And she gives the identical diagnosis to every loving parent after 15 minutes of speaking with them and maybe 5 minutes with a child. And her reports, she's beloved in in the Connecticut family courts because she
Mm.
just churns these reports out to take the child away from the loving parent.
Right.
Perfect.
It- and the thing also is, say a parent does have a good psych eval, and like we'll take mine for instance. I won't go into my case, but the last sentence that he wrote was, "The motives of the ex-husband must be investigated." So the judge just disregarded that psych eval. So if even if you have a pristine psych eval, they don't want to hear it. You're still crazy.
They're all disqualified. My sister had, there were six world-renowned forensic experts who either diagnosed or declared her ex-husband as a psychopath. Actually, the top expert, world expert on psychopathy, did an evaluation, diagnosed him as a psychopath. Others confirmed the diagnosis. Others declared him as a danger to his children and unfit to parent. Six world-renowned forensic experts. It didn't matter. My sister has 11 psychiatric or doctoral level psychologist reports who have done extensive collateral interviews, extensive psychological testing. Some reports are almost 100 pages long. All of them were kept out of uh, any of the decisions. And the court's own appointed guardian ad litem
Mm.
stated after looking at these reports, after only looking at a couple of these reports, said, my sister is mentally fit. She doesn't need any further psychiatric evaluation. The court fired her immediately on the spot as soon as she said it.
They don't want to hear it.
They don't
They
want
have
to.
to fit their false narrative to generate these billions of dollars through these incentives.
Yes. And the judges claim to know more than
Oh,
these
yeah,
dozens of uh, the most highly qualified, world-renowned psychiatric experts because they are convinced
right.
uh,
And
that,
they're also medical doctors,
yes.
Dr. Bandy. I mean, they're medical doctors and they're their own, they're psychiatrists too.
The whole reason the expert witness system was established was because judges don't have expertise in every area. They have to know their limits and to bring in experts
Mm.
where applicable. But in family court, they are the experts. And if it's not their chosen expert, then nobody is qualified and nobody counts. No report counts.
Right. Right. And they also break HIPAA well, they're doing HIPAA violations all the time with
Oh,
these
yes.
innocent, like a parent is too truthful, too honest. They know to take advantage of that parent.
I have a case where the parent is incredibly caring and compassionate, highly psychologically developed, and on top of she has a couple children with learning disabilities and so forth. She's on top of their medical status, all their caretaking needs. And because she's so well versed in this, she studied everything, all the notes that their pediatricians gave her. The court labeled her with Munchausen's by proxy, that she must be making this up because she's so
Mhm.
knowledgeable about these diseases or disorders.
Oh,
So, for those parents who have wonder if their outcome may have been different, if they had a different lawyer, if they made decisions differently, they don't have to have any regrets in this regard because the case is fixed from the very beginning. My sister did not have to get a dozen psychiatric reports from the world-renowned experts because the court was requiring a psychiatric evaluation of her. The guardian ad litem was charged with finding an expert, but
mhm.
she couldn't find one for 3 years, probably because either they recused themselves or backed away, probably because it would be found out how fraudulent their reports would be if
Mhm.
I got hold of the report.
Right.
So, but no amount of evidence matters. In fact, I have found that the more clear-cut the evidence
Mhm.
and the better, more capable parent the victim litigant is, the more aggressively the court will take the child from that parent.
Because they know this good, loving, fit parent is going to fight tooth and nail.
Yes, and they will be convincing.
Mhm.
Many professional parents are also targeted and
Mhm.
left with no rights. I've seen physician mothers who won awards for decades and were exemplary members of their community, and yet they enter family court, their children are taken from them, they've been arrested, their medical license is taken away, and they are on disability.
Mhm. Mhm. It's just, it's not, it's not going to stop until I really think it should be abolished and we just moved everything to civil court. And if people start throwing out false accusations like the opposing attorneys due to these good fit parents, oh, they're mentally ill, and I mean they'll just throw out anything and it'll stick and they'll run with it. The judge will run with it. They'll run that case with it. And
I find that my job in family court is actually very easy.
mhm,
Um, Whoever they label as mentally ill, the more they label as mentally unfit, the more fit they are, and chances are they're incredibly exceptional parents.
mhm,
And the more they are prohibited from having any access to their children, the better their case will be outside of family court. But
right.
of course, family courts fix it so that the case, very few appeals can win now because family courts are given almost unlimited discretion, and case after case
Hmm.
they've increased their discretion, and federal courts don't wish to touch them. Federal courts have an exception of family courts, which I don't understand. Every other case, they would intervene if only a fraction of their civil rights were violated. Yet, probably because the cases are so complicated, and it's kind of like a Pandora's box. If you were to begin looking into one
Mm.
and wonder how this is even possible, how do they get away with this, then you will find 8,000 other cases that are doing the exact same. Not all of them can go to federal court and all the way to Supreme Court because they're all so egregious and historically unprecedented cases. Uh, the whole system needs to be either abolished or completely I'm in your camp. I do believe, and I've written before, that family court should all be abolished immediately.
Mhm.
It's a public health emergency. Transferring 100,000 children to their abuse, torture, rape, battery, and murder every single year is at a level where it's going to affect our ability as a society to remain a democracy.
Right.
Because a democracy requires people to be able to defend their rights, to not be so traumatized that they cannot function, or that they either become perpetrators themselves. A
Hmm.
third of victims of violence in this way become perpetrators, and the rest are subject to either traumatic bonding or acquiescence in order to survive, and will not stand up for their rights. And that's what family courts are aiming for. When
Right.
they separate children from the loving parent and separate them, the duration and severity of separation seems to be almost precisely calculated because they, through their instinctive knowledge
Continuances.
of the psychological situation,
Right.
they do
Right.
it either to the point where they psychologically break the mother
Hmm.
or loving parent, or that the child is brainwashed under torture to the point where they hate the loving parent,
Hmm.
and they will fix the conditions for that to happen
And
psychologically.
exactly, I totally agree with you because they will also do continuances to drag out the case if a parent hasn't seen the child in, we'll say, 4 months. And then they'll come up with some other excuse to drag it out for, oh, we'll do another um, uh, trial in, 4 months. So that means that parent is not going to see that child in 7 months. And what this also does, it turns the kids into personality disorders when they're left with these individuals, these abusive parents that are installing the Stockholm syndrome. And it's a shame how their personality, can change. Here you've got a normal kid, and then a judge takes them away and puts them with the abuser because the abuser wants to get even with that parent for either divorcing them or whatever. And then they really don't want this kid. They don't really even care about this kid. They could have a
Of course
nanny
not.
raising the kid, right? So
Yeah.
these kids eventually have personality changes.
Yes. And they also entice the abuser, I believe. They say that once you have the children, you will get all the marital assets, your legal fees, child support,
Mhm.
uh, the house. which is what happened in my sister's case. My former brother-in-law actually was planning on leaving the house to live with his mistress, leave the kids and leave everything when he first decided to divorce. And family court enticed him
Hmm.
to take the children, and that he never cared for before. He was an absentee father.
Hmm.
He's, I mean, he then that's when all the cuts and bruises and injuries and um, his body slamming,
Hmm.
his giving them head injuries that almost killed each of them started to happen. And when the evidence of abuse became so overwhelming, they helped him kidnap the children and isolate them from anyone who would be able to report their abuse.
Hmm.
And so uh, it's very much a fixed result
Hmm.
based on their measurement of what is needed to transfer the children to the abusers.
I agree. Oh, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt.
What I was trying to think of what I meant to say. This kind of isolating children with their abusers, uh, there's a term that psychologists use. It is soul murder. So family courts create the conditions for the soul murder of these children.
Mm-hmm.
And others have compared it to life sentences. You're sentencing children to a lifetime of torture because once their personality is broken, the way you were describing, and they're disordered, they have a lifetime of psychological, physical problems, relationship problems, substance abuse, and early death by
Hmm.
a couple decades on average.
Right.
So that's what we're creating for the children,
Hmm.
for the
Hmm.
loving adults, the loving parents. It's often a death sentence, as you said.
Yeah.
They drop dead. Young, previously young, healthy uh, mothers are dropping dead in court in ways that medical professionals probably think they're not at great risk because young, healthy mothers simply
Mhm.
don't drop dead like that easily, but they do in family court.
Right.
Unheard of medical conditions happen in family court. And this speaks to the degree of atrocities that are happening behind closed doors in these star chambers
Hmm.
that I have compared to the atrocities that happen in maximum security prisons,
Hmm.
where when there is no transparency and no accountability, gang rapes, gladiator fights, murders, mayhem happen with impunity and
Hmm.
happen constantly. People don't realize what is happening to prisoners without any criminal responsibility. And the same is happening in family courts, but worse because we're speaking of innocent children.
Definitely. And going back to your guardian ad litem issue, these third-party parasites, y- and I've noticed through all these interviews, everything's one-sided. Even in my case with CPS, it was all one-sided interviews. You notice that?
Mhm. Yes.
And then they'll go running to a judge who was an attorney who couldn't get into a private law practice, so they run for judge. And they don't have any experience, maybe. I really can't speak to that, but this is how they get into that position and they become family court judges.
Yes, I have heard that because family court, I mean, even other judges call family court the sewer.
Yes,
No
yes.
one wishes to be family court judge. They create their own shortages because they create crises and catastrophes, and as you said, they prolong cases needlessly just to separate the child from the parent for long periods of time. These are cases that would take an hour or two in family court, in criminal court. The perpetrator gets they get prosecuted, sentenced, and they don't get to frame their victims. They don't get to kidnap their children. They don't get to play any of these
Mhm.
tricks. But since family court is predicated on these tricks and for muddying the waters and for tampering with the evidence.
Hmm.
They prolong these cases. There's a huge shortage because they have to create their cases and complicate them through the appointment of guardians ad litem, through all these court actors that you never see in any other court. And because they can order that the litigant pay for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of court fees,
Hmm.
court actors, expense retainers that they would never in any other setting have to, they've never had this experience of expending so much money. I
Hmm.
mean, I've supported my sister because she was locked out of all her assets. So what I spent in her 5 years of divorce just to keep her alive has exceeded any amount I've spent in my entire adult life.
So that's so sad. This is they're just out to destroy even well financially judges have ordered 401ks to be turned over. It's like that's
Yes.
this has got to stop.
Yes.
It,
And they operate, I mean, they are a criminal gang operating under the guise of a judicial cover. So I say they're actually even worse than a Mexican cartel,
mhm.
because at least the cartels are operating, they're not operating under the authority of the law.
Yeah.
They're just evading the law.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Now,
and once you're caught in family court, you can't get away, just as
no, exactly. People will say, "Well, just walk away, just you don't have to go back in there." It's like, "Oh no, once you get sucked in, you have to defend yourself
yes.
with these false accusations." And I will say that there are good judges out there because when I saw Judge Farber, come out and put an attorney in her place, which was fabulous. And I had a judge one that was really good when the ex was withholding, which was custodial interference, which is a felony, kidnapping. But they are good ones out there, but they're few and far between.
I have not seen a good judge. The best I have seen is a judge who does not care and allows, the usual family court course to unfold.
Mhm.
So I've seen neutral judges in that way, neutral in the sense of not getting involved. But we have the story from a couple years ago of a Washington, D.C. judge who was murdered by the perpetrator because he ruled the right way. So, in fact, I think good judges were eliminated
Mhm.
uh, or were powered into not doing their job because family violence is actually extremely violent.
Mhm.
In fact, extremely dangerous because if there were a murderer coming after you on the street, um, you would have a safe place to return to, namely your home.
Mhm.
But for those who are exposed to family violence and attempted murder in the home, uh, the home is where the danger is happening.
Mhm.
And when so these violent offenders go on sometimes for so long with impunity that when they're held to account in family court, um, they're suddenly so furious and appalled that the judge would do the right thing that they would go after the judge, and judges have been murdered that way. And
Mhm.
so it is a dangerous job. It is a job that a family court judge should not take charge of, I believe, in any case. They
Mhm.
should either, if there's allegations of abuse or violence, they should all go to criminal court where they understand the criminal personality,
Oh,
where
yes.
they do not enable and coddle the criminal personality or depend on the criminal personality to be able to carry out their abuse industry because they manipulate and lie and present themselves so well in public that you can state that you actually did the right thing. Um, they should either all go to criminal court or in non-abuse cases to some cases to civil court. But it really is for non-violent cases um, something that should be handled outside of the legal system. The legal system is, I taught at a law school for 17 years.
Mhm.
The legal system is not equipped to deal with violent individuals, um, murderers, abusers,
Mhm.
organized criminal activity outside of criminal court. And if criminal court is not appropriate for young children, they should be handled in clinics, in medical settings, not in the courts. A former Yale Law School professor, Robert Cover, wrote an influential article called The Violence of the Word, which speaks of how violent the legal system can be and
Mhm.
often is. We should not be subjecting small children to this potential for violence.
I agree. I agree. I could talk to you all day because I totally agree with you. And I know this is like, I'm not going off topic, but I was watching the film, it was called Becoming Jane, about Jane Austen. And towards the end of the film, she stated, and I wrote it down really quick, she said, justice has nothing to do with the law. And I thought, oh my God, so true.
That's right, because you have to prove with evidence, you have to show the truth with evidence, and you have to fight for your rights to get justice. We have an adversarial system in the US, which does not do well for a situation that can be easily turned into he said and she said, as in family court. But in all situations, I find it's an inferior system to the code system that as is used in France or other countries.
Mhm.
We have a different system in the US or the UK. Even the UK is mitigated,
Mhm.
but here it's an easily weaponizable system.
Right. And I also think once we get rid of these, if we can get rid of the Title 4B, D, and E and financial incentives,
Yes.
that these parents can't weaponize the child support. They can't weaponize the foster care or CPS. And
Yes,
that's it.
my brother-in-law, I believe, purely kidnapped the children to be able to demand child support. And he demanded six figures. Even though my sister had been a full-time mother,
Mm.
he created those conditions to isolate and abuse her and had not been working for 15 years. And yet, uh, and if she could not pay, the
Oh,
judge was threatening she could go to jail.
oh, I've been there. I've been there, and people know my case, but I had CPS indications, couldn't work, but the judge didn't care. The child support judge didn't care and didn't care about the history of the case, then threatening me with prison. There's something wrong with these psychopaths, and we need to abolish this as soon as possible.
You can tell of their guilt
Mm.
by the aggressiveness, the paranoia that, you would speak about what is happening in these secretive courts. It really is primarily a First Amendment issue because if
Hmm.
the public became aware of the unheard of atrocities that are happening in these courts, the level of violence, murder, and mayhem, this would never be allowed to happen.
Right. I totally thank you for your time. I don't want to keep you all day, but how can people reach you if they have any questions?
I have a website, bandylee.com, BANDYLEE.com. They can contact me through there. Uh, it also has links to my Substack and Medium articles where I regularly post about family courts.
Excellent. Well, I totally appreciate you, and don't jump off, okay? Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these courtrooms. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, and you can find me on Spotify, YouTube. Please like and subscribe, Apple iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google, and other platforms I don't even know about. Again, feel free to buy me a coffee to help keep this podcast going. Thank you so much, Dr. Bandy Lee, for your insight into all of this, and I completely agree. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for having me. I greatly admire what you do through this important podcast.
Oh, thank you so much.